Emma Martinez pressed her forehead against the cold airplane window of United Airlines Flight 237, her breath creating small circles of fog on the glass that disappeared and reappeared with each exhale. At 11 years old, most kids her age were glued to iPads, binge-watching shows or playing games. But Emma's attention was locked on something far more captivating: the precise 15-degree angle of the Boeing 737's wing flaps as they adjusted for cruising altitude, the subtle way the afternoon sunlight caught the aluminum skin of the wing, the exact mathematics of how 174,200 pounds of metal could defy gravity. Her worn leather notebook, a gift from her father on her 8th birthday, lay open on the tray table, filled with sketches that would make aerospace engineers do a double take. Page after page of aircraft schematics, instrument panel layouts, approach angles calculated in her careful handwriting. On today's page, she was meticulously drawing the view from seat 14C, window side, noting every detail. "Flaps 5 degrees, she whispered to herself, pencil moving across the paper. "Cruising altitude 36,000 feet, ground speed approximately 485 knots. Beside her, Sarah Martinez looked up from her romance novel and smiled with the resigned affection of a mother who'd long ago accepted that her daughter was different. While other parents worried about screen time and social media, Sarah worried that Emma spent too much time studying FAA regulations and memorizing emergency procedures for aircraft she couldn't legally fly for another 7 years. "Honey, we're on vacation," Sarah said gently, tucking a strand of Emma's dark hair behind her ear. "You know you're allowed to just relax." Emma glanced at her mother, her brown eyes serious beyond her years. "I am relaxing, Mom. This is fun for me." In the aisle seat, Colonel Michael Martinez, retired, decorated, and recovering from shoulder surgery that had ended his flying career 3 weeks ago, dozed with his right arm in a medical sling. Even in sleep, his posture was military straight, a habit 4 decades in the Air Force had made permanent. His breathing was deep and even, aided by the pain medication he'd taken before boarding. The doctors had been clear: no flying for 6 months, maybe longer. The shoulder needed time to heal. For a man who'd spent more than half his life in cockpits, from F-16 fighters in his youth to transport aircraft in his later years, the grounding felt like a prison sentence. But he'd accepted it with the same discipline he'd accepted every order in his career. Besides, he had Emma now, his protégé, his legacy. 3 years ago, when Emma was 8, she'd announced at dinner that she wanted to be a pilot. Not in the dreamy way kids say they want to be astronauts or princesses, but with a determination that made Michael sit up and take notice. The next day, she'd asked him to teach her. Most parents would have patted her head and bought her a toy airplane. Michael built her a flight simulator. Not some off-the-shelf video game, but a proper Level D simulator in their basement, the same type commercial airlines used to train their pilots. It had cost him a small fortune and 6 months of weekends, but watching Emma's face light up the first time she flew made every penny and every hour worth it. He'd programmed it to replicate a Boeing 737-800 exactly. Same instruments, same physics, same emergency scenarios. For 3 years, Emma had trained like a real pilot, 547 hours logged. Michael had taught her everything: pre-flight checks, standard operating procedures, emergency protocols, radio communications, weather interpretation, navigation. He'd run her through engine failures, electrical fires, hydraulic losses, rapid decompressions. She'd flown in thunderstorms, crosswinds, fog, ice. She was better than some commercial pilots he'd flown with. But she was still 11, still in 6th grade, still technically just a kid with an unusual hobby. "Mom," Emma said suddenly, looking out the window at the clouds below, "did you know that at this altitude, the outside temperature is approximately -60 degrees Fahrenheit? The cabin is pressurized to about 8,000 feet equivalent, even though we're actually at 36,000. "I didn't know that, sweetheart," Sarah said, though Emma had told her this fact at least a dozen times. "The pilots up front are probably doing their cruise checks right now," Emma continued, her eyes distant, imagining the cockpit she couldn't see. "Checking fuel consumption, verifying the flight management system, monitoring weather ahead. Captain's probably flying this leg. First officer is handling communications." She had no way of knowing that in the cockpit, Captain David Richardson was indeed flying this leg, thinking about his grandson's baseball game tonight, completely unaware of the ticking time bomb in his cardiovascular system. No way of knowing that First Officer Jessica Chen was handling communications, equally unaware that in exactly 43 minutes, she'd be alone at the controls of an aircraft she'd never landed without supervision. No way of knowing that her obsessive 3-year preparation, the hundreds of hours in the simulator, the emergency drills her father had made her repeat until she could recite them in her sleep, the instrument procedures she'd memorized like multiplication tables, was about to become the only thing standing between 178 souls and catastrophe. A flight attendant passed by, and Emma smiled politely. The attendant, Marcus Webb, though Emma didn't know his name, smiled back at the cute kid with the notebook, thinking she was probably drawing pictures or writing in a diary like normal children did. He had no idea that within the hour, he'd be watching that same little girl climb into a captain's seat and help save everyone on board. Outside the window, the clouds stretched endlessly, white and peaceful. Emma sketched them into her notebook, adding annotations about cloud formations and weather patterns. Her father stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about altimeters. Her mother turned a page in her book. United Flight 237 flew on through the perfect June sky, steady and smooth. For now, everything was normal. For now, they were just another family heading to Orlando for vacation. For now, Emma Martinez was just a girl who loved airplanes. The word emergency was still 41 minutes away. But it was coming. Fast, Captain David Richardson had flown this route 847 times in his 22-year career with United Airlines. Denver to Orlando, 2 hours and 43 minutes of smooth, predictable flying. The kind of route pilots called easy money, minimal weather concerns, well-established flight path, routine procedures that could practically be done on autopilot. Literally. At 52 years old, Richardson was the kind of captain flight attendants loved to work with, calm, professional, with just enough humor to make the crew briefings enjoyable. He'd been flying commercial jets for 2 decades without a single incident report. His record was spotless. His health evaluations always came back perfect. Until today. It started as a mild discomfort in his chest, the kind you might blame on the extra spicy breakfast burrito from the airport food court. Richardson shifted in his seat, adjusting his seatbelt slightly, and took a sip of coffee from his travel mug. Probably heartburn. He was thinking about his 8-year-old grandson's baseball game that evening. The kid was pitching for the first time. Richardson had promised to be there, right behind home plate just like always. "Beautiful day for flying," First Officer Jessica Chen said from the right seat, scanning the instruments with the methodical attention of someone still new enough to double-check everything. At 27, Chen was living her dream, 6 weeks and 2 days as a first officer for a major airline. Every flight still felt like a miracle to her. "Perfect conditions," Richardson agreed, his voice sounding normal even as another wave of discomfort rolled through his chest. He flexed his left hand, noticing it felt slightly tingly, probably slept on it wrong. He'd been tossing and turning lately, stressed about his daughter's upcoming wedding. Father of the bride duties were apparently more exhausting than international red-eye flights. The autopilot was engaged. Flight management system showed them on course, everything by the book. Then the pain hit. Not discomfort, not heartburn, pain. Like someone had reached into his chest cavity and squeezed his heart with a frozen fist. Richardson gasped, his right hand instinctively clutching at his chest, his left arm suddenly going completely numb. The coffee mug slipped from his fingers, splashing across the center console. "Dave," Chen's voice seemed to come from underwater, distant and distorted. Richardson tried to answer, tried to say he was fine, just needed a minute, but his tongue had become thick and useless in his mouth. The cockpit instruments he could read in his sleep, instruments he'd been staring at for 20 years, blurred into a mess of meaningless lights and numbers. Sweat poured down his face, soaking his collar. His vision tunneled, darkness creeping in from the edges. "Dave, talk to me." Chen's voice was sharper now, cutting through the fog. Richardson's head lolled to the side. His hand slipped from the control yoke, falling limply into his lap. Through the haze of pain, one coherent thought formed in his dimming consciousness. This is really happening. I'm dying. Jessica Chen had exactly 3 seconds to process what she was seeing before her training kicked in. Her captain, the man who was supposed to mentor her, guide her, be the experienced half of their 2-pilot team, was having a medical emergency. His face had turned gray. His lips were blue. His breathing was rapid and shallow. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." "I have controls," Chen said, her voice cracking despite every hour of simulator training that was supposed to prepare her for this moment. Her hands found the yoke, gripping it so tightly her knuckles went white. The aircraft was stable, thank God for autopilot, but autopilot couldn't land the plane. She would have to do that. She'd never done it alone, not once. In training, there'd always been a check airman in the left seat, watching her every move, ready to take over if she made a mistake. In her 6 weeks as a first officer, Captain Richardson had handled every single landing. Every single one. She'd assisted, sure, called out altitudes, monitored instruments. But actually guiding a 174,200-pound aircraft full of human beings from 36,000 feet to a runway at 150 miles per hour, with nothing between them and catastrophe but her own skill. Never. Her hand trembled as she reached for the radio. "Mayday, mayday, mayday." Her voice was higher than she wanted it to be, faster than she wanted it to be. "Kansas City Center, United 237. We have a medical emergency. Captain is incapacitated. Requesting immediate divert to nearest suitable airport." The controller's response was immediate and professional. "United 237, Kansas City Center, roger your mayday. Captain incapacitated, medical emergency. Nearest airport is Kansas City International, bearing 75, distance 180 miles. Descend and maintain flight level 240. Emergency equipment will be standing by." "Descending to flight level 240, Chen repeated mechanically, her hands moving through the procedures even as her mind screamed in panic. She pulled back the thrust levers slightly, adjusted the autopilot settings for descent. Beside her, Captain Richardson made a horrible gurgling sound. His eyes were half closed, unfocused. Chen jabbed the call button for the senior flight attendant. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. The cockpit door opened. Marcus Webb, senior flight attendant with 15 years of experience and a face that had seen everything, stepped inside. Then he saw the captain, and his professional composure cracked for just a moment, just long enough for Chen to see the fear in his eyes. "Heart attack?" Marcus asked, already moving toward Richardson, already pulling the onboard medical kit from its storage. "I don't know," Chen said. "Marcus, I need help, I need—" She stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. What did she need? A miracle, a time machine, a captain who wasn't dying in the seat next to her. "Is there a doctor on board?" Marcus was already thinking ahead, his hand on his intercom. "I don't care if there's a doctor," Chen said, and the desperation in her voice was raw and real. "I need a pilot, Marcus. I've never landed without supervision. I'm qualified, yes, but protocol requires 2 pilots in the cockpit for approach and landing. If something goes wrong, if I make a mistake, if—" "You won't," Marcus said firmly, but they both knew he was lying. "She might. anyone might. From the medical kit, Marcus pulled out an oxygen mask, placing it over Richardson's face. The captain's chest rose and fell irregularly. His skin was the color of old newspaper. "How long to Kansas City?" Marcus asked. Chen checked the flight management display. 28 minutes. 28 minutes. In the cabin behind them, 178 passengers were laughing, sleeping, reading, completely unaware that their lives now rested in the hands of a first officer who'd been qualified for exactly 6 weeks and 2 days. Completely unaware that the captain responsible for their safety was unconscious and possibly dying. "I'll check for medical personnel," Marcus said, heading for the door. "And Marcus," Chen called after him, her voice barely above a whisper, "ask if anyone on board has piloting experience. Military, commercial, anything." Marcus nodded, his face grim. They both knew the odds of finding a qualified pilot among 178 random passengers were astronomical, but they were out of options. As the cockpit door closed behind him, Jessica Chen was alone with an unconscious captain and an aircraft full of people whose lives depended on her doing something she'd never done before. Her hands shook on the controls. Outside the cockpit windows, the sky was perfect. Clear blue, unlimited visibility, not a cloud in sight. It had never looked more terrifying. 27 minutes to Kansas City. 27 minutes to find a miracle. Or 27 minutes until 178 people discovered what happens when a brand new first officer has to land alone. Chen closed her eyes for just a second, whispered a prayer she hadn't said since childhood, and opened them again. The altimeter continued its steady descent. The clock kept ticking. And somewhere in seat 14C, Emma Martinez was still sketching airplanes in her notebook, completely unaware that in less than half an hour, she'd be sitting in the very seat where Captain Richardson now lay dying. The emergency had begun. And nobody in the cabin knew yet. Nobody except Jessica Chen, who was trying very hard not to throw up. Marcus Webb had been a flight attendant for 15 years, 2 months and 9 days. He'd handled turbulence so severe it sent meal carts airborne. He'd calmed panic attacks at 40,000 feet. He'd dealt with drunk passengers, medical emergencies, and once, just once, a woman who went into labor in first class and delivered a healthy baby girl over Cleveland. But he'd never seen a captain unconscious in the cockpit. Never seen a first officer with that particular look of controlled terror that comes from knowing you're the only thing standing between routine and catastrophe. Never felt his own hands shake quite like this. "Sir, can you hear me?" Marcus knelt beside Captain Richardson's seat, his fingers pressed to the captain's neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, thready, irregular, but there. Richardson's skin was cold and clammy, his breathing shallow. The oxygen mask fogged with each labored breath. Behind Marcus, First Officer Chen was talking to air traffic control, her voice professionally calm in a way that had to be costing her everything. "Kansas City Center, United 237. We need the fastest route to the airport. Captain is unconscious. Possible cardiac event. United 237, turn right heading 085. Vectors for Kansas City International. Descend and maintain 10,000. Emergency services are being notified." Marcus pressed the call button for the rear galley. Sarah Chen, no relation to the first officer, just an unfortunate coincidence that was going to confuse the hell out of the incident report later, answered immediately. "Sarah, I need you to ask if there's any medical personnel on board. Doctor, nurse, paramedic, anything. Tell them we have a passenger with a suspected heart attack. Get them to the front of the cabin. Quietly. Don't start a panic." "On it," Sarah's voice was tight but professional. Marcus looked back at First Officer Chen. Her jaw was clenched so hard he could see the muscle jumping. Her eyes were locked on the instruments, but there was something in her expression that made his stomach drop. Jessica, he said quietly, talk to me. Chen didn't look at him. I can fly the plane, Marcus. The aircraft is stable. I know the procedures. I can get us to Kansas City. But, Marcus heard the word she wasn't saying. But I've never landed without a captain supervising. Not in real conditions. Not with real people. Not with... She gestured helplessly at the cabin behind them. Not with 178 lives depending on me getting it exactly right. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. What if I mess up the approach? What if I come in too fast or too slow or misjudge the flare? What if? You won't, Marcus said firmly, even though he had no idea if that was true. You don't know that, Chen shot back. Nobody knows that. I need help, Marcus, real help. I need someone who's done this before. She stopped, laughed bitterly. I need a captain. The cockpit door opened. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and competent hands stepped through, Patricia Okonkwo, ER nurse from Chicago, currently on her way to visit her daughter in Orlando. She took one look at Captain Richardson and immediately went to work, checking his pulse, his pupils, his breathing. Definitely cardiac, she confirmed after 30 seconds. Could be a heart attack, could be arrhythmia, could be a dozen things. He needs a hospital. How far out are we? 24 minutes, Chen said. He'll make it, Patricia said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely certain. But he needs definitive care, soon. Marcus made a decision. It wasn't in the manual. It probably violated a half-dozen FAA regulations. But they were out of good options, and desperate times called for desperate measures. Jessica, he said, I'm going to ask the passengers if anyone has piloting experience. Chen's head snapped toward him. You're going to tell them the captain is incapacitated. I'm going to ask if anyone can help, Marcus said. We need options. He stepped out of the cockpit before Chen could argue, pulling the door shut behind him. The cabin stretched before him, rows and rows of passengers reading, sleeping, chatting, completely oblivious to the crisis unfolding mere feet away. Marcus straightened his uniform, took a breath, and picked up the intercom handset. His thumb hovered over the button. Once he pressed it, once he said the words, there was no going back. The secret would be out. Panic could spread through the cabin like wildfire. But what choice did he have? He pressed the button. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Marcus Webb, your senior flight attendant. His voice was steady, calm, professional. Years of training made it possible. We're experiencing a medical emergency with one of our crew members. As a precaution, we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Kansas City in approximately 20 minutes. Emergency services will meet the aircraft. There is absolutely no danger to the flight. That last part was a lie, but a necessary one. He paused, gathering himself for the next part. This was the gamble. This was the part that could either save them or cause mass hysteria. If there is anyone on board with military or commercial piloting experience, please press your call button immediately. We may require assistance. The cabin fell silent. That particular kind of silence that comes from collective breath holding, from hundreds of minds simultaneously processing something unexpected and frightening. Marcus could practically hear the mental wheels turning in 178 heads. Why would they need a pilot? Unless, oh God. He watched the call buttons. Nothing. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Then ding. Row 23. A man in his 60s with a weathered face and a Hawaiian shirt raised his hand. Marcus hurried down the aisle. I flew commercial, the man said. Retired 12 years ago, Boeing 727s mostly. Marcus's hope flickered. When did you last fly? 2013, and I've had a few drinks. The man gestured to the mini bottles on his tray table, his eyes apologetic. Marcus's hope died. A rusty pilot who was legally intoxicated wasn't going to help. Another call button, row 31. A younger man, mid-30s, eager expression. I'm a flight instructor, he said proudly. What aircraft? Marcus asked. Cessna 172s, single engine. I've never flown anything bigger than a four-seater. Marcus's heart sank further. A Cessna 172 weighed 2,500 pounds and flew at 120 miles per hour. A Boeing 737 weighed 174,200 pounds and landed at 150 miles per hour. Completely different universes. A third call button, row 42, a woman with military bearing and short-cropped hair. Ma'am. I fly drones for the Army, she said. Predator UAVs, but I've never actually been in a cockpit. Everything's remote. Marcus felt the last of his hope crumble. 3 call buttons, 3 dead ends. He turned to head back to the cockpit, to tell Chen they were on their own, when a small voice behind him said, "Excuse me." Marcus turned. A little girl in a NASA t-shirt stood in the aisle of row 14, her hand not quite reaching high enough to press the call button, so she'd stood up instead. She was pointing at the man sleeping beside her, the man with his arm in a sling. "My dad," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Colonel Michael Martinez, United States Air Force, he's a pilot." Marcus looked at the sleeping man, at the sling on his arm, at the little girl with the oversized confidence. He looked back toward the cockpit, where First Officer Chen was alone with an unconscious captain and 22 minutes until they had to land. He made another decision. "Wake him up," Marcus said. Emma shook her father's shoulder with increasing urgency, her small hands gripping the fabric of his polo shirt. "Dad, wake up. They need you." Michael Martinez surfaced from medication-induced sleep like a submarine breaching, slowly at first, then all at once. His eyes snapped open, his military training overriding the drowsiness of pain medication. Even before he was fully conscious, his body was already responding to the tone in his daughter's voice. That wasn't "Dad, are we there yet?" That was "Dad, something's wrong." "What?" he started, then saw the flight attendant standing over him, saw the unusual tension in the man's posture, saw passengers in nearby rows staring at them with wide eyes. "Sir, I need you to come with me," Marcus Webb said, keeping his voice low but urgent. "Now, please." Michael's brain, foggy from Percocet and muscle relaxers, struggled to catch up. He looked at Sarah, who was gripping his good arm, her face pale. He looked at Emma, who had that expression she got when she was trying very hard to be brave. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. "There's an emergency," Marcus said simply. "Your husband is a pilot." "Retired," Michael said automatically, his hand going to his injured shoulder. 3 weeks retired, medical grounding, I can't." "The captain is unconscious," Marcus interrupted, and the words cut through Michael's medication haze like a knife. "Possible heart attack. First Officer Chen needs help. She's never landed alone. We need someone who's done this before." Michael was unbuckling his seatbelt before Marcus finished speaking. 37 years in the Air Force had programmed certain responses into his DNA. When someone said, "We need help," in that particular tone of voice, you moved. You didn't ask questions. You didn't hesitate. You moved. He stood, swaying slightly as the medication and sudden movement conspired to throw off his balance. Sarah grabbed his arm to steady him. "Michael, your shoulder. The medication, you can't fly," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. They both knew he was going anyway. "I know," Michael said, squeezing her hand. "I'll be careful." He followed Marcus up the aisle, ignoring the stares from other passengers, ignoring the whispers that started spreading through the cabin like ripples in water. Emma was right behind him. He could hear her footsteps, could sense her presence the way parents always know when their kids are nearby. "Emma, stay with Mom," he said without turning around. "No," Emma said, and there was steel in her voice that made Michael pause mid-step. "You might need me." Before he could argue, they reached the cockpit. Marcus knocked twice and the door opened from inside. Michael stepped through, and the full reality of the situation hit him like a physical blow. Captain Richardson, unconscious, gray-faced, oxygen mask over his face, slumped in the left seat while an ER nurse monitored his vitals. First Officer Chen in the right seat, her knuckles white on the control yoke, her eyes locked on instruments she probably couldn't even see clearly through her fear. The aircraft was descending smoothly, autopilot engaged, thank God, but autopilot couldn't land them. Michael's trained eyes swept the instrument panel, taking in everything in 3 seconds. Altitude, 12,000 feet and descending. Heading, 85. Speed, 280 knots. Aircraft stable. All systems normal except for the most critical system of all, the human beings who were supposed to fly it. Colonel Martinez retired, he said to Chen, his voice automatically shifting into the calm, authoritative tone he'd used in 1,000 briefings. 6,000 flight hours, 2,000 on military variants of the 737. I can help you. Chen's head turned toward him, and the relief on her face was so profound it was almost painful to see. Thank God, sir, I just need someone to. But there's a problem, Michael interrupted, because there was no point sugarcoating it. He lifted his right arm in its sling. Shoulder surgery 3 weeks ago. I'm on Percocet muscle relaxers, anti-inflammatories. Legally, I cannot touch those controls. My reaction time is compromised. My fine motor control is impaired. I can advise, I can talk you through procedures, but I cannot fly this aircraft. He watched the hope drain from Chen's face like water from a broken glass. Watched her swallow hard, her throat working. Watched her eyes go back to the instruments, to the altitude that kept decreasing, to the airport that kept getting closer. However, Michael continued, and something in his tone made Chen look back at him. I might have a solution you're not going to believe. It's unconventional. It violates about 17 FAA regulations, but it might be our best option. What solution? Chen asked, desperate enough to grasp at anything. Michael turned to look at his daughter, who had squeezed into the cockpit behind him, her eyes wide as she took in the unconscious captain, the panicked first officer, the crisis that was unfolding. Emma, he said, tell Officer Chen what you've been doing for the last 3 years. Emma looked at her father, then at Chen, then at the instruments. Those beautiful, complicated instruments she'd studied for hundreds of hours in their basement simulator. I've been training, Emma said simply, to be a pilot on a Level D flight simulator. Dad built it for me. I've logged 547 hours. Chen blinked. You're how old? 11, Emma said. But I know the 737. I know every system, every procedure, every emergency checklist. Dad made sure of that. She's 11 years old, Chen said to Michael, her voice rising. You want to put an 11-year-old child in this cockpit? Not to fly, Michael said quickly, his voice steady and calm. To assist. Listen to me, Jessica. May I call you Jessica? Chen nodded mutely. Jessica, you are a qualified first officer. You have the skills to land this aircraft. You know you do. Your training was thorough. You passed every check ride. You earned your seat, but you're scared because you've never done it alone and fear is making you doubt yourself. Yes, Chen whispered, her voice cracking. I'm terrified. That's normal, Michael said. That's human, but here's what I'm proposing. Emma sits in the captain's seat. She doesn't touch the controls, she doesn't fly, but she monitors instruments, she reads checklists. She manages radio communications with ATC. She calls out altitudes and speeds, all the things a pilot monitoring does. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Chen's. I stand right here between both seats. I walk you through every step of the approach and landing. Emma handles the data. You handle the flying. And together, we get 178 people safely on the ground. Chen looked at Emma, really looked at her. Saw a kid in a NASA t-shirt who should be worrying about homework and sleepovers, not emergency landing procedures. This is insane, Chen said. Yes, Michael agreed. Completely insane. It'll never work. It's our best chance. She's a child. She's the most prepared child you'll ever meet, Michael said. Then his voice softened. Jessica, how much time until we land? Chen glanced at the navigation display. 18 minutes. 18 minutes, Michael repeated. In 18 minutes, you can be a hero who brought everyone home safe, or you can be the first officer who was too proud to accept help. Your choice. But choose fast because that runway is getting closer whether we're ready or not. Marcus Webb stood in the cockpit doorway, watching this impossible conversation unfold, thinking about the 178 passengers behind him who had no idea their lives were about to be placed in the hands of a team that included an 11-year-old girl. Chen closed her eyes, opened them, looked at Emma one more time. Emma, she said, recite the emergency landing checklist. Right now, go. Emma didn't hesitate. Her voice was clear, confident, perfect. Recall engine fire or severe damage. Fuel, jettison to landing weight if time permits. Landing gear down. Flaps 30. Auto brake max. Speed brake armed. Go around, consider if approach is not stabilized by 1,000 feet AGL. Chen's jaw dropped. Okay, she said finally. Okay, let's do this. Emma smiled, bright, brave, and utterly fearless. Yes, ma'am, she said, and climbed into the captain's seat. Emma Martinez climbed into Captain David Richardson's seat with the careful deliberation of someone who'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, even though she'd never imagined it would actually happen. Her feet dangled several inches above the rudder pedals. Her head barely cleared the top of the seat back. She looked impossibly small surrounded by the switches, buttons, screens, and controls designed for adult pilots. But her hands didn't shake. Patricia, the ER nurse, had moved Richardson to the jump seat behind the center console, strapping him insecurely while maintaining his oxygen. His chest rose and fell with concerning irregularity, but he was alive. For now. Seat adjustment, Michael said calmly, reaching over his daughter to press the control. The captain's seat whirred forward and up, bringing Emma closer to the instrument panel. He adjusted the rudder pedals inward. How's that? Emma tested the reach. Her feet could now touch the pedals, though she'd never need to use them. Her eyes scanned the instruments, the primary flight display, the navigation display, the engine indication system. Everything exactly where her father had taught her it would be. Perfect, Dad, she said, and something in her voice, that absolute certainty, made First Officer Chen's hands tighten on her own control yoke. This is really happening, Chen muttered. I'm about to land a commercial aircraft with an 11-year-old as my captain. She's not your captain, Michael corrected gently, positioning himself between the two seats where he could see both pilots and all the instruments. His injured shoulder throbbed, the pain medication making everything feel slightly distant and unreal, but his mind was clear enough. It had to be. You're the pilot flying. Emma is pilot monitoring. I'm the advisor. We're a crew now, Jessica, and crews trust each other. Marcus Webb still stood in the doorway, one foot in the cockpit, one in the cabin, torn between watching this impossible scene and returning to the passengers who were starting to notice that something was very wrong. Emergency landing in Kansas City. A flight attendant asking for pilots. Whispers were spreading. Marcus, Michael said without turning around, we need you to keep the passengers calm. Tell them we've got everything under control. Tell them we have an experienced pilot assisting with the landing. You don't have to mention that the experienced pilot can't actually fly and that our pilot monitoring is in 6th grade. Despite everything, Marcus almost smiled. Understood, Colonel. He slipped out, closing the cockpit door behind him. Now it was just the four of them. Michael, Jessica, Emma, and the unconscious Captain Richardson, whose labored breathing was a constant reminder of how bad things had gotten. Okay, Michael said, his voice shifting into instructor mode, calm, methodical, the same tone he'd used in the basement simulator hundreds of times. Emma, put on the headset. Get comfortable. Jessica, I want you to take a breath. A real one, deep breath in. Chen obeyed, her chest rising. Let it out good again. She breathed, and Michael watched some of the tension leave her shoulders. Now listen to me, he continued. You have flown this aircraft dozens of times. You know the procedures. Your muscle memory knows the procedures. Your training was excellent. I can tell by how you've handled this emergency so far. The only thing different about this landing is that you don't have a captain sitting next to you telling you what you already know how to do. But what if, Chen started. No what ifs, Michael interrupted firmly. What ifs will kill you. We deal with what is. And what is that you are a qualified 737 first officer who is about to execute a textbook emergency landing. Emma is going to handle the monitoring tasks. I'm going to provide guidance. But Jessica, he waited until she looked at him. You are flying this airplane, your hands, your decisions. Trust yourself. Chen nodded slowly, some color returning to her face. Emma, Michael said, check in with Kansas City approach. Inform them of our crew situation. Emma's hand found the radio transmit switch as naturally as if she'd done it 100 times before. Because she had, just never in a real cockpit, with real lives depending on it. Kansas City approach, United 237. Her young voice came through clearly, professional despite her age. We have Colonel Michael Martinez, retired Air Force, providing advisory support to First Officer Chen. I'm assisting with systems monitoring and communications, requesting vectors for ILS approach runway 19 left. There was a pause on the other end. The controller had obviously been briefed about the medical emergency, but hearing a child's voice from the cockpit of a commercial airliner had to be a first. United 237 Kansas City approach, the controller responded, his voice careful and measured. Roger that. Understand you have advisory pilot and additional crew assistance. Turn left heading 040. Descend and maintain 4000. You're 15 miles from the airport. Emergency equipment is in position. Left to 040, descending to 4000, United 237. Emma acknowledged perfectly, her hand already reaching for the autopilot controls to dial in the new heading. Good, Michael said. Jessica, configure for approach. Emma, approach checklist. This was the moment. The point where they'd find out if 3 years of simulator training could translate to reality. If an 11-year-old girl could actually function as part of a flight crew. If a medicated, injured pilot could guide them from behind without touching the controls. If a first officer with 6 weeks of experience could trust herself enough to land. Emma's eyes found the approach checklist on the display. Her voice was steady as she read, altimeters. Checked and set, Chen responded, her hands moving to verify the instruments. Approach briefing. Complete, Chen said, having reviewed it mentally during the descent. Landing gear. Chen's hand moved to the gear lever. There was a thunk as the 3 wheels extended and locked into place. 3 green lights illuminated on the panel. Down and locked, 3 green, Emma confirmed, checking what Chen already knew. Flaps. Setting flaps 5, Chen said, moving the flap lever. The aircraft's nose pitched down slightly as the wing configuration changed. They worked through the checklist with a precision that would have impressed any Czech airman. Emma called items. Chen confirmed them. Michael watched, offering occasional guidance but mostly staying silent, letting the 2 pilots find their rhythm. Below them, Kansas City sprawled across the landscape. The airport was visible now, a gray rectangle in the distance. They were at 4,000 feet, speed 180 knots, on profile, on course. Everything by the book. 15 miles out, Emma called. On glide slope on course. Looking good, Michael said, and he meant it. Against all odds, this crazy plan was working. Chen's hands on the controls were steadier now. Emma's voice was confident and clear. They were functioning as a crew. But the hardest part was still ahead. The landing. "Jessica," Michael said quietly, "how are you feeling?" Chen took a breath. "Terrified," she admitted, "but ready." "That's all any pilot ever is," Michael said. "Terrified and ready. Welcome to the club." Through the windscreen, the runway grew larger, closer, more real. Behind them, Captain Richardson groaned softly, still unconscious. Emma's hand found her father's good one and squeezed it once, quickly, before returning to the instrument panel. "We've got this, Dad," she said. Michael looked at his daughter, this impossible, brilliant, brave child, and felt his throat tighten. "Yes," he said, "we do." The altimeter continued its countdown. 3,000 feet. 2,500. 2,000. Kansas City International Airport, runway 19 left, was dead ahead. And United Flight 237, with the most unconventional crew in aviation history, was coming home. One way or another, at 2,000 feet above Kansas City, with 12 miles to the runway, the full insanity of what they were attempting finally crystallized for Jessica Chen. She was about to land a Boeing 737 carrying 178 souls with a semi-conscious captain strapped to the jump seat, an injured advisor who couldn't legally touch the controls, and an 11-year-old child reading her checklists. If this worked, it would be a miracle. If it didn't, it would be a catastrophe that would make international headlines. United 237, Kansas City Tower, the radio crackled. "You're cleared to land runway 19 left, wind 020 at 8 knots. Emergency equipment is standing by." Emma's hand moved to the transmit switch before Chen could react. "Cleared to land 19 left, United 237. Emergency equipment acknowledged." The professionalism in that young voice was surreal. Chen glanced sideways at the girl, at the child, who sat in the captain's seat with the focused intensity of someone 3 times her age. Emma's eyes moved constantly between the primary flight display, the navigation display, and the engine instruments, exactly the way a pilot monitoring should scan. 10 miles out, Emma called. "Altitude 1,800, speed 170 on glide slope, on center line." "Good, Emma," Michael said from his position between the seats. His injured shoulder was killing him, the pain medication wearing off, but he couldn't afford to think about that now. "Jessica, how's the aircraft handling?" "Responsive," Chen said, her voice steadier now. "Autopilot is doing most of the work, but I'll need to disconnect for final approach." "Not yet," Michael cautioned. "Let George fly as long as possible, reduces your workload." "Emma, landing checklist." Emma's fingers danced across the display, pulling up the checklist. "Landing gear." "Down 3 green," Chen confirmed, glancing at the indicator lights. "Flaps." "Extending to 30, Chen said, moving the flap lever to the landing position. The aircraft's pitch changed, nose dropping slightly as the wing configuration shifted for landing. The speed began to decrease. "Speed brake." "Armed," Chen said. "Auto brake." Chen hesitated for a fraction of a second. The auto brake setting determined how aggressively the aircraft would brake after touchdown. Too much and they'd slam the passengers forward. Too little and they might run off the end of the runway. "Set it to 3, Michael said, reading her hesitation. "Firm landing but nothing the passengers can't handle. We've got plenty of runway." "Auto brake 3, Chen confirmed, making the selection. They were at 1,500 feet now, 8 miles out. Chen could see the airport clearly, the runway stretching out like a gray ribbon, the red and white emergency vehicles lined up on the taxiway, tiny from this distance but growing larger with every passing second. In the cabin behind them, Marcus Webb was moving through the aisles with practiced calm, ensuring seatbelts were fastened, tray tables were up, seats were in their upright positions. Passengers watched him with anxious eyes, some praying, some holding hands with strangers, all of them aware that something was wrong but not knowing exactly how wrong. Sarah Martinez sat in seat 14C, her hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She stared at the closed cockpit door, knowing her husband and daughter were behind it, knowing they were trying to save everyone, and feeling utterly helpless. 1,200 feet, Emma called out. 6 miles, speed 160, glide slope centered, localizer centered. Perfect, Michael said. Jessica, you're doing great, nice and stable. This is a textbook approach. But Chen's heart was hammering against her ribs. They were getting close now. Soon she'd have to disconnect the autopilot and hand-fly the final moments of the approach. Hand-fly the landing, the thing she'd never done alone. Her hands felt slippery with sweat on the control yoke. 1,000 feet, Emma announced, her voice cutting through Chen's spiraling thoughts. 5 miles, speed 155. Decision height will be 200 feet, Michael said calmly. That's when you'll decide if the approach is stable enough to continue. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, we go around. Climb out, circle back, try again. There's no shame in a go-around. Understand? Understood, Chen said, though the thought of having to do this twice made her stomach clench. 800 feet, Emma called. 4 miles on profile. The runway was clearly visible now through the windscreen. Chen could see the white threshold markings, the touchdown zone stripes, the approach lights leading toward them like a path. Jessica, Michael said, his voice dropping to that particular tone instructors use when they need their students to really hear them. In about 90 seconds, you're going to disconnect that autopilot, and when you do, you're going to discover something. What's that? Chen asked, her eyes never leaving the instruments. That you already know how to do this. Your hands know, your body knows, trust them. 600 feet, Emma called. 3 miles, gear down and locked, flaps 30, speed 150. Chen's right hand moved to the autopilot disconnect button on the control yoke. Not yet, not yet. 500 feet, Emma said, 2.5 miles. The runway filled the windscreen now. Real, solid, rushing toward them at 150 miles per hour. 400 feet, Emma's voice remained perfectly steady. 2 miles, approaching minimums. Disconnect autopilot, Michael said. You have the aircraft, Jessica, manual flight. Chen's thumb pressed the disconnect button. A soft chime sounded. The autopilot disengaged. Suddenly she could feel everything. Every tiny movement of the control yoke. Every breath of wind pushing against the aircraft's massive surface area. Every ounce of the 174,200 pounds that she was now personally responsible for bringing safely to Earth. Her hands trembled. 300 feet, Emma called. 1 mile on glide slope, on centerline looking good. Small corrections, Michael coached. Feel the aircraft, listen to her, she'll tell you what she needs. Chen made a tiny adjustment, correcting for a slight drift to the right. The aircraft responded immediately, moving back toward the center line. 200 feet, Emma announced. Half mile, you're in the slot, Jessica, perfect approach. They crossed the threshold of the airport boundary. The emergency vehicles were clearly visible now, fire trucks, ambulances, their lights flashing silently. 150 feet, Emma called. Threshold in sight. The runway markings were sharp and clear below them. Chen could see individual lights in the approach system, could see the painted numbers, 19L, rushing toward them. 100 feet, Emma said, and for the first time Chen heard the slightest tremor in the girl's voice. Just a hint. Just enough to remind everyone that she was, after all, still a child. 50 feet, 40, 30. Start your flare, Michael said calmly. Easy back pressure, let her settle, feel for the runway. Chen pulled back gently on the yoke, raising the nose, bleeding off the descent rate. The ground was right there, just feet below them, the runway rushing past at horrifying speed. 20 feet, Emma called. 15, 10. Hold it, Michael said. Hold it off. Let her float, let her settle. The main wheels were inches from the runway. Chen held the back pressure, fighting every instinct to force it down, to get it over with, too. 5 feet, Emma whispered. The main landing gear touched the runway. But they weren't down yet. Not safely. Not until they stopped. And in the next 30 seconds, everything could still go catastrophically wrong. The main wheels hit the runway with a solid thump that reverberated through the entire airframe. Not graceful, not gentle, but safe. For a fraction of a second, Jessica Chen felt a surge of relief. We made it, we're down. But her training immediately overrode the emotion. They weren't safe yet. Landing wasn't complete until the aircraft stopped moving. Thrust reversers, Michael commanded sharply. Chen's hands moved automatically, pulling back the thrust levers past idle into the reverse position. The massive engines roared, their power now directed forward instead of backward, fighting against the aircraft's momentum. The deceleration was immediate and forceful. Speed brakes deployed, Emma called out, checking the indicator. Auto brake engaged. The nose wheel slammed down hard, harder than Chen wanted, and the entire aircraft shuddered. In the cabin behind them, passengers gasped. Some cried out, hands gripping armrests and each other. The braking force pressed everyone forward against their seatbelts. They were on the ground, but they were still traveling at over 130 miles per hour. And the runway, while long, was not infinite. Reversers normal, Emma reported, her eyes scanning the engine instruments. Both engines responding. Chen's feet were pressed hard on the brake pedals, the auto brake system helping but not doing all the work. She could feel the massive weight of the aircraft fighting against the brakes, feel the incredible energy that had to be dissipated before they could stop. 120 miles per hour. The runway centerline streaked beneath them in a blur. Emergency vehicles paced them on the parallel taxiway, their lights spinning, their crews ready for the worst. 100 miles per hour. Looking good, Jessica, Michael said, his voice steady despite the fact that his daughter was experiencing what most people never would, a genuine emergency landing in a commercial aircraft. Nice and straight, speeds coming off. 90 miles per hour. Chen's eyes flicked between the windscreen and the instruments. The far end of the runway was visible now, getting closer, but they had plenty of space. They were going to make it. They were actually going to make it. 80 miles per hour. In seat 14C, Sarah Martinez finally allowed herself to breathe. She'd been holding her breath since she felt the wheels touch down, her entire body rigid with fear. Around her, other passengers were starting to realize that the landing, rough as it was, had been successful. Someone started clapping. Others joined in, the sound building into genuine applause mixed with nervous laughter and tears of relief. 70 miles per hour. 60 knots, Emma called out, using the proper terminology. 50, 40. The aircraft was slowing now to taxi speed. Chen began to ease off the brakes, not wanting to stop too abruptly. The thrust reversers automatically stowed as they decelerated through slow speed. 30 miles per hour. United Flight 237 rolled to a complete stop approximately 7,000 feet down the runway, with over 3,000 feet of pavement still remaining ahead of them. The engines spooled down to idle. The auto brake system disengaged with a soft chime. For a moment, nobody in the cockpit moved. They just sat there, 3 people and 1 unconscious captain, processing what had just happened. Then Chen's hands started shaking, really shaking. The adrenaline that had kept her focused and steady throughout the entire emergency was now draining away, leaving her trembling and weak. She looked down at her hands on the yoke and they seemed to belong to someone else. "I did it," she whispered. "Oh my God, I actually did it." "You did," Michael confirmed, and his voice was thick with emotion. "You brought everyone home safe, Jessica. You did good. You did real good." The radio crackled to life. United 237, Kansas City Tower. Outstanding job. Emergency crews are approaching your aircraft now. Do you need medical assistance to access the aircraft? Emma's hand moved to the transmit switch, but this time her hand was shaking too. The calm, professional demeanor she'd maintained throughout the crisis was cracking, revealing the frightened 11-year-old underneath. "Tower United 237, she said, and now her voice wavered. "We need immediate medical attention for Captain Richardson. He's unconscious, possible heart attack, and can someone tell my mom I'm okay?" There was a pause on the other end. When the controller spoke again, his professional composure had slipped too. "Copy that, 237. Medical team is rolling now. And yes, we'll make sure your mother knows. You did an amazing job up there, young lady. Really amazing." Through the windscreen, Chen watched as fire trucks and ambulances surrounded the aircraft, their crews moving with practiced efficiency. Paramedics were already positioning a mobile stairway at the forward door. Marcus Webb's voice came over the intercom, audibly shaken but trying to maintain professionalism. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely in Kansas City. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened while emergency personnel board the aircraft to assist our captain. I want to thank you all for your patience and cooperation during this emergency. You're all safe now." The cabin erupted in cheers, applause, and more than a few sobs of relief. Michael reached over and unbuckled Emma's seatbelt, then pulled her out of the captain's seat and into a one-armed hug, careful of his injured shoulder. She buried her face in his chest, and he felt her whole body shaking. "You were so brave," he whispered into her hair. "So incredibly brave, I'm proud of you." "I was scared, Dad," Emma admitted, her voice muffled against his shirt. "The whole time I was so scared." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Michael said. "It means you do what needs to be done even when you're terrified. And honey, you did exactly that." The cockpit door burst open. Paramedics rushed in, immediately focusing on Captain Richardson. Patricia, the ER nurse, briefed them quickly, suspected myocardial infarction, unconscious for approximately 35 minutes, vitals unstable but present. They worked with swift efficiency, transferring Richardson to a gurney, starting additional IV lines, attaching portable monitors. Within 2 minutes, they were wheeling him out of the cockpit toward the waiting ambulance. Another paramedic appeared, this one looking at Chen with concern. "Ma'am, are you injured? You're shaking pretty badly." "I'm fine," Chen said, though she clearly wasn't. "Just adrenaline, I'm fine." "Let us check you out anyway," the paramedic said gently, guiding her out of her seat. As Chen stood on legs that threatened to buckle, she turned back to look at Michael and Emma. The retired colonel with his arm in a sling, standing protectively beside his daughter who barely came up to his shoulder. The most unlikely co-pilot she could have ever imagined. "Thank you," Chen said, her voice breaking. "I couldn't have done it without you, either of you." "Yes, you could have," Michael said firmly. "You had the skill, we just helped you remember that." Sarah Martinez appeared in the cockpit doorway, her face streaked with tears. She didn't say anything, just grabbed Emma and held her tight, held her like she'd never let go. Outside, passengers were being deplaned through the emergency slides as a precaution, evacuating onto the runway where buses waited to transport them to the terminal. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras recording everything. Social media was already exploding with cell phone videos and breathless accounts of what had happened. But in that moment, in the cramped cockpit of United Flight 237, none of that mattered. What mattered was that 178 people were walking away. All of them alive. All of them safe. Because a first officer found courage she didn't know she had. Because a retired colonel put his daughter's training to the ultimate test. And because an 11-year-old girl proved that heroes come in all sizes. The emergency was over. The landing was complete. And somehow, impossibly, miraculously, everyone had survived. Captain David Richardson opened his eyes in the cardiac intensive care unit at St. Luke's Hospital 6 hours after emergency triple bypass surgery. His first words, whispered through an oxygen mask to the nurse adjusting his IV, were, "My plane. Did they land safe?" The nurse, a veteran of 30 years who thought she'd heard every patient question imaginable, smiled and pulled out her phone. She showed him the headline that was already dominating every news outlet in America. 11-year-old girl helps land commercial jet after captain's heart attack. All 178 passengers safe. Richardson's eyes filled with tears as he read the article, saw the photos of Emma Martinez being carried off the aircraft by her father, saw First Officer Chen being embraced by other pilots who'd rushed to the scene. He thought about the 178 souls he'd been responsible for, the 178 people he'd failed by having a heart attack at the worst possible moment. But they'd survived, all of them, because of an inexperienced first officer who found strength she didn't know she had, a retired colonel who couldn't fly but could teach, and a child who'd spent 3 years preparing for a moment she'd hoped would never come. "They saved my life too," Richardson whispered. "That little girl saved my life." He was right. The rapid response, the quick landing, the immediate access to medical care, it had made the difference. The cardiologist told him later that if the flight had continued to Orlando, another hour in the air, he would have died. The FAA investigation began within hours of the landing. Senior investigators flew in from Washington, interviewed every person involved, pulled the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, analyzed every second of the emergency. The preliminary report, released 3 weeks later, was unprecedented in its tone. While it noted that utilizing an unqualified minor in the cockpit violated numerous federal aviation regulations, the investigators concluded that Colonel Martinez had made the only reasonable decision given the extraordinary circumstances. First Officer Chen was formally commended for exceptional airmanship under extreme duress. Emma Martinez was cited for unprecedented assistance that contributed to the successful outcome. But the report went further. It recommended new protocols for extreme emergencies involving passenger assistance. It suggested enhanced training for first officers in single-pilot operations. It proposed studying whether simulator training for young people could be standardized and recognized in emergency situations. The aviation industry, typically resistant to change, actually listened. Within 6 months, the FAA implemented new guidelines. Airlines revised their emergency procedures. Flight schools began discussing youth training programs. Emma Martinez, whether she'd intended to or not, had changed aviation. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. By the time the Martinez family reached their hotel in Kansas City that night, interview requests had flooded in from every major network. Good Morning America, The Today Show, CNN, Fox News, 60 Minutes, The Ellen Show, even international outlets, BBC, CBC, Al Jazeera, wanted the story of the little girl who'd helped land a plane. Michael and Sarah were protective, carefully limiting Emma's exposure. She did exactly 3 interviews, all with the same stipulations. They had to emphasize Jessica Chen's role, they couldn't sensationalize the danger, and they had to acknowledge that Emma was just part of a team. In each interview, Emma wore her NASA t-shirt and deflected praise with a maturity that made grown journalists emotional. "I just read the checklists my dad taught me to read," she said on Good Morning America. "Officer Chen flew the plane, she's the real hero. I was just helping." But the letters came anyway, thousands of them, from little girls who suddenly saw aviation as possible, from parents of daughters who wanted to know about Emma's training, from pilots who thanked her for representing the profession with such grace, from teachers who asked to use her story in their classrooms. One letter stood out above all others. It arrived 2 weeks after the landing, handwritten on hospital stationery. Captain Richardson, recovering from surgery, had written it himself despite his shaking hands. Dear Emma, you gave me back my life. You gave 177 other people their lives. You gave First Officer Chen her confidence. And you've given thousands of young girls a reason to believe they can fly. When I got into aviation 40 years ago, I never imagined I'd owe my life to an 11-year-old girl. But here we are. And I'm grateful, so grateful, that your father trained you, that you were on my flight, that you were brave enough to step up when everything went wrong. I'm retiring now. My flying days are over. But yours are just beginning. And someday, when you're sitting in that left seat for real, wearing captain stripes on your shoulders, I hope you'll remember that you've already done the hardest landing you'll ever do. The sky is waiting for you, Emma. Go claim it. With deepest gratitude, Captain David Richardson. Emma kept that letter in a frame on her bedroom wall, right above her flight simulator controls. Jessica Chen returned to flying 3 months later, after mandatory counseling and additional training. Her first flight back, she requested Emma Martinez as a guest in the cockpit during boarding. The two of them sat in the captain and first officer seats, and Chen showed Emma all the controls she'd only monitored during the emergency. You know, Chen said quietly, I almost quit after that day, thought I couldn't handle the pressure. But you didn't quit, Emma said. No, Chen smiled. Because every time I thought about quitting, I remembered that if an 11-year-old could keep her cool during an emergency landing, I could handle a normal flight. She paused, then added, You saved more than just the passengers that day, Emma. You saved me too. On Emma's 12th birthday, a large package arrived from Boeing headquarters. Inside was a scale model of a Boeing 737-800, registration number N37287, the exact aircraft from Flight 237. The plaque on the base read, To Emma Martinez, future captain, we're saving a seat for you. The Boeing Company. Also in the box was a handwritten note from the CEO. Our simulators are available whenever you're ready for the next level of training. But the gift Emma treasured most came from her father that evening. After her birthday dinner, Michael led her down to the basement where their simulator waited. He'd been cleared by his doctors to fly again, his shoulder finally healed. Ready for another session? He asked, settling into the instructor's seat. Emma grinned, climbing into the pilot's seat, a seat that felt different now, charged with meaning it hadn't had before. What's the scenario tonight, Dad? No scenario, Michael said, and his voice was thick with emotion. Tonight you just fly, no emergencies, no crisis, just you and the sky. You've earned that. Emma's hands found the controls she'd touched during humanity's darkest moments and its brightest. She looked at the instruments, at the simulated horizon beyond the screens, at the future that stretched before her like an endless runway. Outside their basement window, a commercial jet passed overhead, its navigation lights blinking against the stars. Somewhere up there, Jessica Chen was flying a route. Captain Richardson was home with his grandson, teaching the boy to dream big. And 178 people were living their lives because a team had refused to give up. Emma started the pre-flight checklist, her voice steady and sure. The sky had been waiting. And Emma Martinez, all of 12 years old, had never been very good at waiting. Her journey was just beginning. And something told her, told everyone who'd witnessed what she'd done that impossible June day, that the world hadn't seen the last of Emma Martinez. Not by a long shot. The girl who'd helped save Flight 237 was going places. Preferably at 36,000 feet.